Warning. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
One small step for man. One giant leap for mankind.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
NASA, even through the Apollo missions, and their best efforts at pushing the field of science beyond where it is today, they are always at the mercy of Congress and the public. So when disaster strikes, they must embark on a mission to redeem themselves. This will take a long road through tragedies that will threaten the reputation of NASA. But in the process, NASA will triumphantly gain a tool to change and inspire the public which it serves. In the 1980s, following the triumphs of the Apollo era, the public and the United States government had their confidence in NASA shaken by various tragedies. In response, NASA sought to spark new inspiration by launching the Hubble Space Telescope in 1990. Initial tragedies due to distortions in the telescope's lens heightened NASA's already challenged public relations, but repairs to the Hubble restored the public's awe of space and provided NASA the opportunity to launch into a new era of exploration. Our window on the universe, the mission to redeem NASA amidst tragedy. Prior to the 1980s, NASA experienced the triumphs of the Apollo era, but the benefits NASA received from the Apollo era were short-lived. By the end of the Apollo program, the budget for NASA had fallen by nearly $20 billion, and 66% of the American people felt that the US spent too much on the space program. In addition to this, NASA's new space vehicles, the space shuttles, would need missions to prove their usefulness. One of the projects proposed was the Large Space Telescope, with the scientific community calculating that a telescope in space would outdo the best land observatories. The telescope had the following statement attached in the budget. The Large Space Telescope is one of the more important programs likely to be requested by the NASA Office of Space Science in the remainder of this decade. It is essential that costs be minimized to ensure that a vigorous, balanced space science program can be maintained. Following changes that aim to decrease the cost and size of the telescope, construction on the project began. In May 1984, the Subcommittee on Space Science and Applications held a hearing to discuss the ongoing development of the Hubble Space Telescope. Harold Volkmer, the chairman of the subcommittee, opened the meeting by saying, "Since the program first began nearly 8 years ago, the subcommittee has supported the Space Telescope despite its large cost overruns, schedule slips, and management problems. Unfortunately, the program continued to have issues." Charlie Pellerin, a former director of astrophysics at NASA, explains.
And then in 1982, it overran by additional $1 billion, got my boss fired. I became director then when he got fired. And I had to go back to the Congress 3 more times to get approximately $1 billion 3 more times.
In spite of these difficulties, the Hubble Space Telescope was scheduled to launch in August 1986 on the Space Shuttle Atlantis. But tragedy struck on January 28, 1986, when the Challenger space shuttle tore apart. The New York Times reported to the American people, "Now, suddenly, after an investment of $30 billion and 14 years, and the reverberating shock of failure, we are left full of doubts not only about the shuttles and NASA's fabled competence, but about the very fundamentals of our national space policy." The tragedy resulted in a pause on the shuttle program that delayed the launch of the Hubble Space Telescope until April 24, 1990, when the Discovery Space Shuttle would take it into orbit. Challenger redefined the purpose of the Hubble Space Telescope. Now it not only needed to produce good science, but also it needed to redeem NASA in the eyes of the public. As Charlie Pellerin explains, NASA's management had other things beyond science to worry about.
And for them, it wasn't about science. It was about repairing NASA's image after the Challenger failure. So Hubble was going to be the proof that NASA knew what it was doing and recovered from Challenger.
The Hubble's new purpose led to NASA working hard to engage the public on the promise of exemplary images.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery with the Hubble Space Telescope, our window on the universe.
A month after the launch of the telescope, a public affairs officer invited the press to see the telescope's first images. As a consequence, the media tragically saw the telescope's unfocused images and were not impressed. NASA attempted to assure the media that the images would get better, but by the next week, NASA reported that scientists had discovered that the Hubble Space Telescope had a spherical abrasion. NASA's failure to redeem themselves after the Challenger and their failure to deliver on their promises sparked outrage against NASA.
I mean, it was so bad that I didn't look at news at all. I didn't read newspapers. I couldn't take it. I didn't look at late night television.
The pressure for the media pushed those in charge into a state of being unwilling to risk more money on the already failed project. The project manager for Hubble explains it in this way.
So then I met with the head of NASA's appropriations, Congresswoman Barbara Mikulski, and she spit on me and screamed at me and put her finger in my chest and said, "There'll never be an appropriated dollar to fix this telescope." And the administrator of NASA was with me, Dick Truly. He said, "Did you hear the Congresswoman?" I said, "Yes, sir, I did." So I went back to NASA, sat in my office for about an hour, and decided to proceed anyway. So I, against her orders and the administrator's orders, I secretly put together a budget of $60 million and began secretly figuring out how to fix the telescope with my friends that knew how to do this.
6 weeks after Charlie Pellerin assembled his technical team to work on a solution for the Hubble Space Telescope, they triumphantly went public about the solution they had developed. In the meantime, other departments at NASA found ways to use computers to enhance the images. Finally, NASA was on its way to triumphantly redeem itself.
Okay, the committee will come to order, and without objection, permission is granted for coverage of this meeting by television, radio, and still photography.
A month before the first surfacing mission for the Hubble Space Telescope, the Subcommittee on Space held a meeting to review the upcoming launch and the tragedy of what got them there.
Happy to have you here, and today, of course, the subcommittee is going to examine the status of the Hubble Space Telescope, a project that became a symbol, I'd say, of a troubled space program when it was found to have a flawed mirror shortly after its launch. While the scientific yield from Hubble has been impressive, in spite of its flawed mirror, the American taxpayer, I think, deserves to know what happened, and more importantly, how we keep it from happening again and how we reacted.
Under management troubles and fudge reports, the Hubble Space Telescope had been tragically launched with a flaw that could have easily been discovered. The contractor responsible for the grinding of the mirror had to pay an out-of-court settlement for the crime. In the upcoming month, the Endeavour Space Shuttle triumphantly performed the Hubble Space Telescope's first surfacing mission, allowing it to take quality pictures. The Hubble Space Telescope would now be the catalyst for redeeming NASA.
And we have a go for main engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we have liftoff. Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour on an ambitious mission to service the Hubble Space Telescope.
Since the Hubble Space Telescope was launched in 1990, the telescope has changed both the field of science and the public's perception around NASA and space. Over the course of its lifetime, the telescope had 5 surfacing missions, allowing it to keep pace with current technology and expand its capabilities. Within the field of astronomy, more than 15,000 scientific papers have been written using the telescope's data, and at NASA, the official Hubble Space Telescope website held 10% of NASA's web traffic. Triumphantly, the attention the Hubble Space Telescope has received from the public has not only allowed NASA to keep a high approval rating, but has influenced the way the public imagines space. The media on the tragedy of the Hubble Space Telescope created the stage for the telescope to have more lasting triumphs on the culture, society, and NASA's public relations than the telescope would have had if things had gone to plan, making the return on investment from the Hubble Space Telescope in both the field of science and public relations greater than all of NASA's major past projects. And even now, as new telescopes strive to the heights of the Hubble Space Telescope, the telescope keeps triumphantly pushing the field in unique technology set and awe-inspiring images of the universe.